Hello, everyone. This is Michael Cross with Unlock the Door Radio, and tonight we have an incredibly special guest with us. That being the very famous professor, very MIT. That being Noam Chomsky, and I'm sure most of you have heard of him. And I'm just going to let him take over the show because he's certainly more of an expert than I am on this. And hello, Mr. Chomsky.
Hi, how are you?
Very good, very good. Thanks. I was just wondering. I was listening to a numerous number of your videos, and I've shared those with my students in my regular job. And I was particularly taken with one in which you were talking about the idea that America always seems to be on the quote right side when it comes to promoting democracy around the world. And, I guess that's same here with situations in Egypt and Syria and so forth. And the media always seems to kind of jump in and, support this idea that America is always right. We're always the ones with the white hats. We're the exceptional ones. Could you elaborate on that? Because I just thought that was so profound.
Yeah. Well, it's true. There's even a name for it. It's called American Exceptionalism, and it's a doctrine which is adopted pretty much across the spectrum. There is a debate going on about foreign policy, so a lively debate about, say, what's called sometimes the Obama doctrine. Every president has to have a doctrine, ever since Nixon. So what's the Obama doctrine? Well, there's a debate as to whether Obama is going to hold aloft the banner of American exceptionalism the way his predecessors have done, proudly maintaining that the U.S. is exceptional, or is he going to veer towards what's called isolationism, which is a strange notion in itself. Isolationism means we should obey international law and accepted practice, and not act like a rogue state that uses force, violence, and threat at will. That's called isolationism. But both between these extremes, the debate rages. Both extremes accept the fundamental principle of what's called American exceptionalism, namely what you described, that the United States is dedicated to freedom, equality, democracy, human rights, all good things. They agree, of course, that we sometimes make mistakes in our innocence or naivete or their blunders, but nothing can be fundamentally immoral or improper. That's American exceptionalism. That's accepted on all sides. A couple of comments to make about this. For one thing, there's nothing particularly American about it. Every great power takes the same stand. So Stalinist Russia prided itself on its advancing the cause of human civilization, promoting democracy, people's democracy, defending the world against the fascist forces led by the United States. Imperial Japan, in its right in the midst of its worst horrendous atrocities, you read its internal documents. They were discussing with each other how they're going to bring an earthly paradise to the people of China. They're going to, in Manchuria, the ones they were massacring, they're going to protect them from the Chinese bandits who are trying to disrupt the peace and harmony and development that they're bringing, and so on. Same with Hitler. Hitler was going to, when he took over Czechoslovakia, was going to end ethnic cleansing, bring the conflicted people of the country under the cover of Germany with its advanced culture and advanced technology, and would help them develop. Britain, of course, was so magnificent that only those who were really backward could impute ugly motives to it. Even the leading figures like John Stuart Mill advocated this position. France had its civilizing mission. Go back anywhere you like, you find the same thing. So it's not, American exceptionalism is not exceptional. Another aspect of it is that the doctrine is immune to fact. It doesn't matter what the facts are. Actually, that's even been pointed out by some of the most well-known and respected advocates of American exceptionalism. So take, for example, Hans Morgenthau, fine scholar, one of the founders of the dominant field of the dominant school of international relations. It's called realism, hard-headed, no sentimental realism. Morgenthau was one of the founders. And he wrote a book called The Purpose of America, in which he presented the thesis that the United States is unlike all other countries, past and present, in that it has a purpose, a transcendent purpose. The purpose is to bring equality and freedom and democracy and other good things everywhere. But he was a serious scholar. So he looked through the record and he recognized that the United States has consistently acted in ways which violate its purpose. And then he adds an interesting comment, which is to the point, although not in a way he intended. He says to criticize the notion of American exceptionalism, of fundamental U.S. idealism, to criticize it on these grounds is like the error of atheism, which criticizes God's munificence on grounds that evil exists. And he says we can't fall into the error of atheism. That means that the doctrine holds whatever the facts, immune to fact. So it's a religious doctrine, and it should be regarded that way. It's a secular religion, one commonly constructed by power systems to justify themselves, to justify their own crimes and atrocities, which are at most, as Obama said about the invasion of Iraq, a blunder, a strategic blunder. He was greatly praised for that by liberals, to say it's a strategic blunder, though they didn't bother pointing out that you could read the same thing in Pravda in the early 1980s, where commentators who had their own form of exceptionalism, Russian exceptionalism, complained that the invasion of Afghanistan was a blunder, strategic blunder, shouldn't have done it. Or for that matter, the German generals after Stalingrad, they recognized that Hitler's two-front war was a strategic blunder, shouldn't have done it, should have knocked off Britain first. Well, we don't admire them for these stands. In fact, we regard them as morally grotesque. But the same stand on our own part is regarded as highly moral and extremely admirable. So Obama is honored for taking this position. And that follows from the exceptionalist doctrine that whatever we do is very well motivated, even though we can make mistakes. We were innocent, we were naive, we didn't think things through, so we got something wrong. I mean, even the most saintly person or power system can make mistakes. Now that's with regard to democracy, which you brought up. It's an interesting case, and it accords very well with Morgenthau's thesis, inadvertent thesis, that the doctrines of religion. So, for example, there have been, it's consistently the case that the United States opposes democracy. You mentioned the Middle East. Consistently, the United States has opposed democracy in the Middle East. And this has been recognized internally. So, for example, you go back to 1958, President Eisenhower raised the question with his staff why there is what he called a campaign of hatred against us in the Arab world, and not by the governments, which more or less support us, but by the people. And the National Security Council, the main planning agency, in fact, came out with an analysis, a document, it's long been declassified, in which they explained the campaign of hatred. They said there's a perception in the region among the people that the United States supports harsh and brutal dictatorships and blocks democracy and development, and that we do it because we have the goal of controlling their energy resources. And it went on to say that this is pretty accurate, and furthermore, that's what we should be doing. But nevertheless, we support democracy. And it goes on till the present. So, for example, in recent years, there has been exactly one free and democratic election in the Arab world. It was in Palestine in January 2006, carefully monitored, well observed, pronounced free and fair. How did the U.S. react? Well, it reacted by immediately turning to harsh punishment of the population, siege, support for other brutal measures, for coercive measures, sanctions. Europe went along. Israel, of course, was in the forefront. Why? Because they elected the wrong people. They voted the wrong way in a free election, so they have to be punished. There's nothing unusual about that. In the case of Iran, it's over and over again. That's what's done in the real world. But to bring that up is just the error of atheism, as Morgenthau put it. You have to believe the doctrine no matter what the facts. In fact, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, the one thing that I remember during the presidential primaries is when Ron Paul brought up the coup that the United States backed, well, actually created in Iran to overthrow the government that was elected there. And he had, of course, his supporters were applauding, but this packed audience just started laughing as if he had just said something about space aliens. And it seems that the public, and even these people who should have been better informed and actually at least have known some of the history in that region, since the debate was on foreign policy, they don't know. And how does the media play into this, creating this situation that it's always, this American exceptionalism and we're always the ones who are right, whether that's, again, as in Hamas in Israel or in Syria or any number of other places where we are actually funding groups that are doing some really nasty things.
Well, it's the media, but also we should recognize that it's also the broader intellectual community, including much of scholarship, much of international relations and scholarship and political analysis. Not all, so there is fringe of scholarly work and actually a fringe of media commentary that does bring out the truth of the matter, but it's a fringe. And to those who bring out the truth, the response is essentially Morgenthau's. That's the error of atheism. The truth doesn't matter. So let's take, why did people laugh when Paul stated an obvious and uncontroversial fact that the U.S. had carried out a military coup in Iran in 1953, which overthrew the parliamentary government and installed the reign of a brutal tyrant, the Shah? Probably because if they knew anything about this, what they thought they knew was the propaganda of the period and since. Namely, that of course it's unpleasant to throw out a government, but we had to do it to defend the world against the communist menace, against the Soviet Union. And so, well, it's unfortunate, but there was a Cold War going on, and we had to defend the world against communism. Same with Hitler's argument, incidentally. He had to defend the world against Bolshevism. And the Germans believed it, and Americans believe it. Actually, if you look at the actual facts, quite different. Just to illustrate, the best scholarly study of this has just appeared about a year ago by Ervand Abrahamian, Columbia University, Iranian scholar of Iran. Very good book. Uses internal documents, Iranian and American. It's by far, it's the gold standard in the field. It's called The Coup. So it's probably been mentioned here. And what it points out is that the Russian threat was fabricated, of course, as it almost always the case. And that the reason for the coup was simply pretty much what the National Security Council mentioned a couple of years later. Purpose of the coup was to assure Western control over Iranian oil supplies. In fact, one part of the coup was it contributed to the long-term U.S. policy of displacing Britain in the region. Remember, Britain had been by far the dominant force in the Middle East region, as throughout most of the world. And that changed with the Second World War, and slowly over time, Britain was reduced to the status of what the British Foreign Office called a junior partner. In the case of Iran, the oil resources had been 100% in the hands of a British company, Anglo-Iranian Oil, British Petroleum now. The conflict began when the elected prime minister, with overwhelming popular and parliamentary support, decided to try to nationalize the oil industry to take over the resources for the benefit of Iranians. That was intolerable, and the U.S., Britain first, and the U.S. Carried out the military coup. Its consequences reverberate to the present moment. In order to ensure Western control, but one consequence was that American companies took 40% of the British concession. It's kind of an interesting story there, time to go into, but that was one outcome and part of the gradual displacement of Britain in the favor of U.S. power throughout the region, and in fact, the world. But to know that requires going beyond the headlines, the op-eds, the general books, the articles and journals and so on. You have to really look at the facts, and people don't do that. And if they do, those who do would probably react the way Morgenthau did. Well, it's just the error of atheism to point this out. In fact, if you look at Iran today, there's a lot of it's a front page topic today, the U.S. and Iran. But take a look at it. I don't know about Sweden, but here, almost all the coverage takes the assumption that, of course, the United States is in the right in this conflict. And we have to determine whether Iran is honorably going to submit to U.S. demands, which are, of course, right. So can we trust the Iranians to really do what we want them to do? Now, of course, what is claimed is that it's what the international community wants them to do. So the claim is, well, look, the international community wants them to eliminate their nuclear programs. The phrase international community here means the United States and anybody who happens to be going along with it has to exclude most of the world. So most of the world, the non-aligned countries, vigorously supports Iran's rights to developing a nuclear program, not nuclear weapons, of course, but they say they're not doing that. U.S. intelligence more or less agrees, but to develop uranium enrichment. That's their right as part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And that's supported by most of the world, take, say, the Arab countries. What you read in the press is that the Arabs support the United States and demand that Iran give up these programs. Well, the reference is to the Arab dictators, the dictators of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Emirates. And it's true that the dictators go along with us, but not the populations. Populations don't like Iran. In fact, Iran is very much disliked in the Arab world, but it's not regarded as a threat. A very small number regarded as a threat. What they regard as a threat overwhelmingly is the United States and Israel, not Iran. However, it's considered natural in the West to refer to the dictators as being the Arabs. What do we care about the populations? It's a good indication of the depth of the hatred of democracy on the part of the Western democracies. It shows up in many other ways, but this is a striking one right today. So it's not the international community, it's the US and a couple of its allies. Furthermore, if you look at the record, there's no time to run through it, I've written about it. There have been numerous possibilities to mitigate whatever threat anyone thinks Iran poses or to eliminate it. In fact, there wasn't a definite agreement between Turkey, Brazil, and Iran just a couple of years ago, which actually Obama had proposed. But then when it was actually implemented, the U.S. bitterly condemned it and undermined it. Just last December, there was a planned meeting in Helsinki in order, under the auspices of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, essentially the United Nations, to carry forward the proposal for a nuclear weapons-free zone in the region, weapons of mass destruction-free zone in the region. Well, if that were implemented, it would mitigate, maybe end, whatever threat the United States and its allies think they perceive. What happened to it? It didn't take place. What happened is that Israel announced that it would not attend. Next thing was, what would Iran do? Iran announced that it would attend with no conditions. A couple of days later, President Obama canceled the meeting, giving various pretexts. There's strong support for it around the world, almost everywhere. But the U.S. is not going to permit it, and nor will its allies, as long as it covers Israel, which of course has hundreds of nuclear weapons and chemical weapons and so on. But they have to be excluded. They're a U.S. client. So therefore, this very promising attempt to approach the alleged threat in a very comprehensive way disappeared. Well, how did the media handle that? Well, I can tell you about the United States because it's been investigated. They handled it by not mentioning it. Literally, all of this passed without a mention. Do the database search yourself and see. Now, that's subordination to power of a pretty remarkable kind. And it's unfortunately not that unusual.
I know you're on a really tight schedule. In the final couple minutes, what would your suggestion be to listeners who want to know the truth? What's the best strategy to use if you have this like monolithic media that's controlled by 6 mega corporations? What can people really do to find out what's going on now?
Well, people who are isolated, alone, they really can't do much. That's hard. Some can, but it's hard. So the first thing to do is to become parts of organized communities that are interested in seeking the truth about these matters. And they exist, peace groups, others. The second thing is to explore sources that are easily available to us. We're lucky to live in very free countries. We don't get tossed into the gulag for writing articles about these things or talking about them as we're doing now. We can do it. The sources are there. The documents are available. And we can look into them. By now, with the internet, it's not even that difficult, including alternative media, fringe media, in which these things are discussed. I've written about them. You can read the professional arms control journals, which do report the basic facts. Take some research, take some work, but it can be done. It's even possible to do it alone, but of course much more efficient to do it in collaboration with others. And out of that can come activist programs, which will overcome the distortion, suppression, and misleading picture given by the propaganda system. It's work, but it's certainly possible. It's been done in many cases. Afraid I'm going to have to leave. I've got another.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and keep up the good work, Mr. Chomsky.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye now.